The tiny carnivorous snowmen are relentless, sharp fangs dripping with blood as they crawl en masse towards the mobile task force, opening fire on them with their assault rifles. Who would have guessed that a mere hour or two earlier, a young boy was joyfully playing around in the snow here? How had things gone from frosty to freaky so fast? Let's rewind the clock. There was a chill in the air, that lingering, biting cold that would gnaw at your exposed skin if you dared to step outside in anything less than a thick, warm coat for protection. The ground was still coated in a heavy snowfall, a holdover from Christmas just past, weather that had refused to let up well into the early days of the new year. Everyone reaches an age where the cynicism of life, the weight of expectations that keep you anchored in the real world, they all coalesce to rob you of the childlike wonder of the snow. As you get older, the snow loses its novelty. It becomes a source of inconvenience, something that you need to shovel off the driveway to take your car out. Whereas, turn the clock back to youth, and it's like a tiny miracle. It coats your whole world in a clean blanket of freezing frost, turning the ordinary into a wonderland. Robert and Michaela Anderson were glad that their son Michael was still at an age where he could enjoy the snow. After all, Michaela getting to take her son out in his sled or seeing him hurling snowballs at Robert was able to provide them with a little bit of warmth during the freezing cold, snowier months in Missouri. Optimism was never enough to melt the snow, however, and maybe that's what drew in those creatures, the snowmen. It was early 2019, not even a full 2 weeks into the year. By now, Michael had gotten used to the fact that after Christmas and New Year's Day, a begrudging return to school would soon follow. As much as it clearly brought down his mood, nothing lifted his spirits like still getting to be out in the snow. And after a long day of helping his mom take down the tinsel and pack up the lights while his dad disposed of the tree, Michael was itching to go outside. "Please, Mom?" he begged as a box of decorations was placed back in the attic, his hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "Please, please, please, just 5 minutes. I won't go further than the front yard." Michaela sighed, partly from exhaustion, but a smile crept onto her face. It was hard not to find her son's love for the snow endearing. "All right, but only for 5 minutes," she insisted firmly. "And I want to see gloves, hat, and a scarf, not just a coat, mister." With the speed and excitement that she and her husband had long since lost, she watched Michael race off to gather his warmest winter coat. "Remember when we were like that?" Robert heaved a sigh as he appeared from chopping up that dried-out, dehydrated remains of the Christmas tree. "No, do you?" Michaela replied with a light chuckle. Before long, Michael had donned his gloves and coat, almost a size too big. His scarf was almost wrapping up his entire head, save for the little bobble hat that poked out at the top. Robert opened up the front door, and his son stepped out into a world that had been whitewashed with clear, cold snow. Given that the Andersons lived on a small street in Grain Valley, there weren't many other people around, especially not with another flurry of snowfall moving closer in the clouds up above. But it wasn't the next snowfall that the residents of Grain Valley, Missouri should have been worrying about. It was the previous one, the one that had already fallen, and what was now hiding among the snow in the Anderson family's front yard. Having few other kids his own age to play with and not being allowed to venture too far from the front porch, Michael was content to spend his precious time outdoors making snow angels or practicing throwing snowballs. He had long been trying to get one to clear the roof of the small house he and his parents shared, leaving a few scattered patches of snow embedded on the roof shingles. A few meters from the front door stood a snowman. Granted, that was hardly a rare sight at this time of year, especially in the cold weather, but what was so unusual about it was that Michael hadn't remembered making a snowman recently. His parents hadn't let him out in the snow on his own since the start of the new year, given how badly the downfall and icy winds had been for the first week of January. Sure, somebody else could have made it, taking a pause as they passed by the Andersons' front yard, although not Michael nor either of his parents had spotted anyone doing that. The snowman itself was featureless, the white of its ice-cold body smeared with mud and dead leaves, debris that had been packed in with the snow used in its crude construction. It was featureless, too. Whoever had made it hadn't gone to the effort of giving it a face, nor draped an old scarf over it or given it a hat. It just stood there, but not like any other snowman. There was nothing welcoming about it. In fact, it was, fittingly, cold. Given how far away it stood, it was almost as if it was watching the house. Curiously, Michael began to approach the snowman. Being only 9 years old, his imagination was immediately running with the possibility that this snow and mulch construct could be alive, much akin to the likes of Frosty the Snowman. Little did young Michael Anderson know that he wasn't far away from the truth. Although this particular snowman wasn't quite the happy, jolly soul from the much-covered holiday song. He hadn't got that much closer to the snowman when he heard something move nearer to where he stood. There was the rustle of leaves and the snapping of small twigs coming up from a bush next to him. Michael couldn't see what it was, but it was far too low to the ground and too close to the house for it to be a bird. Maybe a possum or raccoon had gotten trapped in the thin branches and was now scrambling to try and free itself. Diverting from approaching the snowman, he walked closer to the plant. As he did, the rustling got louder, more frantic, almost hungry. There wasn't just one creature lurking out of sight beneath the leaves, but lots of somethings. Robert and Michaela had been sitting indoors watching the TV when they heard a spine-chilling scream coming from outside. Instantly, they were both up on their feet, racing toward the front door. Robert threw it open, and Michael dashed inside in floods of fearful tears. "What happened, sweetie?" Michaela asked, concerned, brushing snowflakes from her son's coat. "Are you okay? Did you slip?" Through crying and sniffling, shaking uncontrollably with how afraid he was, Michael couldn't find the words to answer. Instead, he pointed through the still open door directly at the snowman, still standing at the edge of the front yard. "How long has that been there?" Robert wondered aloud, taking a single step outside. "Don't, Dad!" Michael screamed. But it was already too late. Something small and speedy had leaped out of the snow in the front yard and latched onto Robert's leg. He howled as he felt searing pain, bitten by rows of tiny pointed teeth, as sharp as needles and as bitterly cold as ice. Stumbling back, Robert Anderson fell over and landed on the floor in the front hallway, inadvertently carrying whatever had attacked him into his home. Both Michaela and Michael screamed in fear as the tiny creature clawed its way up Robert's leg while he swatted at it frantically, trying to brush it away before it could get closer. With a blind swipe of his hand, he knocked the creature to the floor and clambered to his feet, arms outstretched, keeping his wife and son behind him, while staring in disbelief at what had bitten him. It was barely more than half a meter tall, a tiny, white snowman. Bulbous, bloodied eyes bulged from its head, much like those of an insect. Directly between the eyes was a hole, a mouth not unlike a lamprey, lined with rows of sharp teeth that all pointed inwards. It reared up and lunged toward the Anderson family in a display of aggression that caused all three of them to jump, warily backing away from the snow creature. It was then that Robert and Michaela noticed what had frightened their son so much. Out of the corner of their eye, they both simultaneously caught the sight of the open front door and the yard beyond. Wriggling through the snow, shifting as they moved, were even more of the creatures, slithering towards the house like piranhas catching the scent of blood in the water. And standing ominously just beyond the driveway was the snowman, as if it was the general commanding its troops to storm the house. The Andersons raced upstairs as the swarm of snow creatures came spilling into the house, crawling from the yard onto the floor and piling on top of each other, like ants to climb the stairs. Naturally, Michaela's first instinct, as well as protecting her son, was to call the police. While Robert held the door to the bedroom shut, Michaela held Michael close and pleaded with the local Grain Valley Police Department to come and help them. Although they only seemed to take the call seriously when Michael started screaming again. One of the snow creatures had pushed its way under the door frame and was sneaking its way towards Robert to attack him, leaving a trail of water behind it. Stepping back and thinking fast, Robert grabbed a hairdryer and switched it on full blast. The sudden rush of electrically heated air caused the toothy snow creature to retreat into a corner. Refusing to let up, Robert got closer and kept the hairdryer trained on it, eventually causing the creature to melt, until little more was left than a damp puddle. But the victory was momentary. There were still more of them crawling up the stairs after the Andersons. With their sharp teeth, they were gnawing at the wood of the bedroom door, trying to force their way inside. Fortunately for Robert, Michaela, and their son Michael, they wouldn't be able to recall the horrific events of January 12, 2019 for much longer. By the time the local police arrived, it had become clear to the officers responding that they were well out of their depth, especially when one of them was injured, suffering a bite from a snow creature. That was what led the SCP Foundation being called in. and within 15 minutes, they had dispatched Mobile Task Force operatives to secure the anomaly. Being some of the Foundation's most highly trained agents, it didn't take long for the MTF to neutralize the carnivorous snow creatures. However, they quickly realized that the mysterious snowmen that had seemingly spawned the swarm could not be melted by any conventional means, nor would it deteriorate naturally on its own. A cover story was issued that Michael had suffered an accident and fallen down an open pothole that had become obscured by heavy snowfall. As a result, police officers were dispatched to help him, although the injury sustained by one officer due to a bite from a snow creature was never explained. Following this, the Anderson family was administered amnestics, meaning they quickly forgot about the whole terrifying ordeal. Maybe it was for the best, however. Young Michael seemed irreparably changed. He never went out to enjoy the snow again, repeatedly suffering from nightmares about the cold. Meanwhile, the anomalous snowman was recovered and thus designated as SCP-4230. Immediately, the SCP Foundation did as their organization does best and commenced testing, with a human subject, no less. They quickly discovered that SCP-4230 seemed to generate a sort of field around itself that could trigger a distinctive physiological change in any human being or animal that came within 6 meters of the snowman. This process became known under the designation of SCP-4230-1. It appeared that Michael Anderson had managed to unknowingly escape this fate purely by not getting too close to SCP-4230, staying just far enough away so as not to trigger SCP-4230-1. The Foundation placed D-19375, a member of their D-Class personnel, within this 6-meter radius of the snowman, and observed the gradual changes he underwent over the following week. For simplicity's sake, we'll refer to D-19375 as Frost, a rather fitting moniker, and you'll soon see why. Within a day of exposure to the snowman, Frost complained to a senior researcher that he felt a lot colder than usual, although he exhibited no other observable symptoms beyond the coughing and sniffling of a common cold. By the following day, Frost was far worse for wear, appearing to have lost significant body mass to the point where he'd appeared to have been malnourished. His cold-like symptoms had continued, accompanied by disorienting dizziness, and as if all that wasn't bad enough, his skin tone had seemingly lost its natural pigment, reduced to an unnaturally pale shade, as white as snow. Day 3 saw Frost's body continue to change rapidly at an alarming rate. He was internally producing an unknown chemical that looked to be responsible for enacting certain alterations, namely the dissolving of his femur and fibula. The cold and dizziness were also now made all the worse by the addition of pain to the man's lower body. Frost even reported to Foundation researchers studying him that every movement he was able to make caused him to suffer extreme levels of physical pain. But yet, rather than attempt to cure his condition, the Foundation apathetically observed, noting down the process of SCP-4230-1. Within 5 days of exposure to SCP-4230, naturally occurring substances within Frost's body had traveled downwards and solidified. This was followed by the most shocking stage of the SCP-4230-1 process so far, and one that made the Foundation realize that these weren't just changes, it was a transformation. When Day 5 saw Frost's skeleton physically reshaping itself, his head becoming a sphere and his arms extending outwards like brittle twigs, it soon became clear what was happening to him. He was turning into a snowman. Rendered immobile and blind, a week after SCP-4230-1 began to take effect, Frost had started to secrete an unknown substance. This liquid lowered his body temperature, freezing almost instantly, and turning his skin into an icy white mass, worryingly similar to snow. Sure enough, on the 8th day, the extent of the SCP-4230-1 process was made evident. Frost had already perished, his body now looking identical to a plain, featureless snowman. No eyes or face, just a blank, cold slate. But underneath the outer layer of snow, Frost's bones and the rest of his organs were still contained inside. From the outside, though, he wasn't even human anymore. Just an instance of what became known as SCP-4230-A. However, being turned into another snowman by close proximity to SCP-4230 wasn't even the worst part. By now, you might be wondering, what were those snow creatures that attacked the Andersons? You'd be forgiven for thinking that perhaps these were rodents or other wild animals affected by SCP-4230-1. After all, testing has shown that the process doesn't just alter human physiology, but these carnivorous needle-toothed creatures are known as SCP-4230-Bs, and they are nasty little critters, to say the least. When a person or animal is turned into a snowman during SCP-4230-1, becoming one of these instances is far from the full extent of the transformation. The tests the Foundation conducted on Frost, and presumably on numerous other D-Class personnel as well, led to them discovering the further alterations made when someone becomes an SCP-4230-A instance. Their freezing snow-encased bodies become hosts for white, spherical eggs. After a subject like Frost becomes an SCP-4230-A snowman, these eggs will hatch within 72 hours, producing up to 19 instances of SCP-4230-B creatures. The Foundation was quick to examine these bizarre snow spawn, gathering up as many as they could for testing. They found that instances of SCP-4230-B matured to adulthood remarkably quickly, reaching adulthood in 15 seconds. Destroying the eggs containing these creatures seemed to be an effective way of preventing swarms of SCP-4230-Bs from getting loose, although the snowman each egg came from would also have to be destroyed to achieve this result. Also, the lifespans of the smaller snow creatures only lasted for a total of 24 hours, and they would melt away after a full day of life, regardless of the surrounding temperature. SCP-4230-Bs seem uninterested in food that was presented to them. Specifically, one test involved giving a snow creature a head of lettuce and a watermelon. The creature regarded the fruit and vegetables with little interest, even refusing to eat either despite prompts from the researchers. This painted the SCP-4230-Bs as exclusive carnivores, which explained why they attacked the Anderson family. They were trying to eat them, hunting the Andersons as a pack. Further testing into SCP-4230-Bs revealed they had a weakness to heat above a temperature of 40 degrees Fahrenheit. During another test, a D-Class was sent into a cell with 10 of the carnivorous snow creatures, armed only with a simple lighter, an emergency flare, and 1 gallon of gasoline. Immediately, all 10 of the SCP-4230-Bs crawled toward the man, hungry, and determined him to be a new source of food. That is, until they noticed the lighter he was carrying. The D-Class frantically clicked the spark wheel until the flame danced from the lighter, causing 7 of the creatures to back away from the heat source cautiously. The D-Class was able to kill the remaining 3 instances in self-defense, causing them to melt with little effort. He was far luckier than the subject of the next test would be. Another D-Class was placed in a holding cell with 3 of the snow creatures, and much like before, they instantly acknowledged his presence and began approaching him. However, the Foundation had sent this member of D-Class in completely unarmed, without even so much as a match to defend himself. The carnivorous beasts made short work of their helpless victim, feeding on what was left. The Foundation was able to dispatch instances of SCP-4230-B with relative ease, even without waiting for them to simply melt after a day. The use of flamethrowers or drawing them into warmer areas seemed effective enough at destroying the small snowman that hatched out of SCP-4230-A bodies. However, some bright spark at the Foundation decided to test what would happen if the opposite element was used against SCP-4230-B creatures. Were they vulnerable to the snow despite being made from a snow-like substance themselves? Another test was conducted to answer this, which involved a small snowball being thrown at one of the SCP-4230-Bs. The result of that incident has been entirely expunged from the Foundation's archives, but it's a safe guess to ask why. Evidently, when attacked using snow or ice, SCP-4230-Bs are seemingly able to adapt in some way that is determined to their attacker. Do they add snow to their mass or become even more aggressive? It's hard to say given the redactions, but the result of that final test were deemed so catastrophic that the Foundation banned any further testing that involved SCP-4230-Bs. As for where SCP-4230 first came from, the Foundation is still baffled. The first reported incident involving the killer snowman and the carnivorous creatures it produced came when the Andersons found themselves under siege by hungry SCP-4230-Bs. Maybe the snowman is just a freak of nature, or the result of an unknown pathogen or microorganism carried in a snowstorm one fateful night. Or perhaps SCP-4230 is something far, far more vicious. Whatever the case, we would recommend waiting for the sun to come back out and the snow to melt, just to be safe. Now go check out SCP-4666 the Yule Man, and SCP-784 Christmas Cheer for more anomalous absurdity from the time of year when the weather outside is delightful, but for the Foundation, things are truly frightful.